I would tell my colleagues the other issue that we have to look at. We spent months trying to get answers from the top executives so we could finish the study, and part of that were the answers from Victor Lee, who we now learn it wasn't really Victor Lee, according to his lawyer, who actually answered those questions. It was the We Charity who wrote those answers. If I don't know if my colleagues have bothered to read those answers that were recently given, but they're highly problematic and they really raise questions about the credibility of a parliamentary committee. If you have witnesses simply saying it's none of our business how their financial dealings went, we don't have to give you those answers. This was about a $560 million deal with the Canadian people. It's a pretty straightforward thing. The Parliament has a right to know what due diligence was done. What was the capacity of this organization? I see on the Canada Summer Student Service Grant, Victor Lee's signature is on the agreement. The question: what financial information was requested by the Government of Canada in their decision-making process for we to be awarded the Canada Summer Service Grant? I do not know, he writes. What assurance did we give the Government of Canada that it could handle the financial load of this fund? I do not know, he writes. What payment software was in place for we to pay students through the funds earned through the CSSG? He writes, our primary system was a national payroll provider. Wow, he doesn't even say which one. Our secondary service was working with one of Canada's largest financial institutions to deliver the funds. He doesn't say who it is. This is not a joke. We're talking about $500 million to $1 billion of taxpayers' money. What was the system that they were using? Who was their partner? We don't know. Your signature is on the service contract of the Canada Summer Student Service Grant. Why was the contract retroactive to May 5th? He says, I was not personally involved with the negotiations. What assurances were you given from May 5th onwards expenses would be covered, though no contract was signed? Again, he says, I was not personally involved. But the issue here is that according to Wee's lawyer, it says because he, Mr. Lee, is unable to review or access the company records, he asked We Charity to help answer the committee's questions. So are we to believe that the We Charity executive doesn't know who authorized the spending of money on May 5th when there was no contract signed? I will be returning on this issue when we have the final documents all presented, but I think it's highly problematic for our committee, regardless of your political stripe, that you could be given such disregard and answers. In terms of their corporate ownership, why were we asking these questions? We were asking questions about corporate ownership with because we wanted to be able to know how the money flows. That's a pretty straightforward question to ask. And we still don't know. So one of the questions was, who is the registered owner of Era Valley from Mama's Corporation? He writes, I do not know. Well, that would be we executives saying they do not know. Well, we have documents that say that this corporation was owned by Mark Kielberger. It's one of their flagship operations, their flagship operation of selling bracelets, which they say is empowering women. If it's a private company of Mark Kielberger, well, that certainly raises questions. So how many of the other we companies are private or partly owned by the brothers or family members? And he says that that's outside the committee's mandate and refuses to answer. I think that's highly problematic. First of all, why are the we executive deciding what's within our mandate to ask in terms of due diligence and funding? This is why we had to ask them back a couple of times, because we are dealing with a signed agreement that would have given them $500 and some million in the first round, and maybe upwards of $900 million. We have a right as parliamentarians to know how the money flows. To be told they don't know who runs these corporations or they're not going to tell us is not on in my books. Not when we're dealing with a supposed charity that raises money in our kids' schools. And again, Mr. Chair, I'm going to be returning to this, but I'm asking my colleagues to start reading up on these documents, because I think this is something we need to address, regardless of what else happens at this committee. We need to be able to actually have a sense of whether we got clear and honest answers, or whether we got played. And as a parliamentarian, I don't like my committee time to be wasted by witnesses who are not going to give us answers. We ask how many for the list of the schools that were built, because their lawyer wrote to us and said, we has built 1,500 schools. I believe they had built 1,500 schools. I had no reason to doubt that. But then questions were raised. Questions were raised about donor manipulation. It would have been the best, simplest option for them to shut down all that concern by simply showing us the list. Here's the 1,500 schools we built. 1,500 schools, by the way, is the equivalent of one school every 5 days for 20 some years. That's an incredible machine for building schools. And yet they can't tell us where the schools are. I find that extraordinary. If you're raising money, if you're out there, you're on the ground, you're doing this, you would know where those schools are. And yet they tell us that it would take too much time to find out. I've spoken with people who are in the field working in international development. You know where your projects are. You have to know where your projects are. So this question of the 1,500 schools, where are they? Who built them? Were they built? We know some schools were built, and I'm not doubting that some schools were built. I'm not doubting that some really good work was done. But I am questioning why a parliamentary committee can be told it would be too hard to find out where all our schools are. They said it would take them months. Well, we gave Mr. Lee and we well over a month, month and a half to come up with this. The question of schools was well over 4 months in the public eye. I would think that if your business model is based on telling people that you built schools, you would have been able to supply that answer to Parliament right away. But instead, we get told they can't tell us. So I'm going to be returning to this matter once we've seen all the documents. I want to make sure that we know what's in every document, but whether or not we were given the straight answers, I'm asking my colleagues to consider this as something bigger than our partisan interests. This is about the role of Parliament to actually get answers and to be able to report to Parliament.